On the 24th of October 1942, a British tank sat wrecked in the sand outside El Alamein. It had been hit the day before. The turret was scorched. One track was thrown, but the hull was whole and the engine could be saved. By the next morning, it was gone from that spot. Not destroyed further, not abandoned. Towed out overnight, stripped down behind the lines, and back with a squadron within days. A few hundred meters away, a German tank in almost identical condition sat in the same sand for the rest of the battle. Nobody came for it. It was never coming back. That difference, not the guns, not the armor, not even the generals, is one of the most overlooked reasons Britain won the Desert War. And it's a story about a vehicle that never fired a shot. For most of the 20th century, armored warfare ran on a simple, brutal piece of arithmetic. A knocked-out tank was either worth saving or worth writing off, and every major army had to decide which way to bet. The Soviet approach, developed from the 1930s onward, chose volume over preservation. Simplify the casting, shorten the expected engine life, accept a machine that wouldn't last because statistically it wouldn't need to. A tank at the front had a life expectancy measured in weeks, so building one to survive for years was, by that logic, wasted effort. It wasn't a foolish position. It was a coldly rational reading of a war of attrition, and for a long time, it worked exactly as intended. Recovering a damaged tank instead of replacing it is expensive in a completely different way. It requires a specialist vehicle that costs nearly as much as a tank and carries no weapon to defend itself. It requires a trained crew that can't be replaced with a fortnight of conscription. And it requires that vehicle to drive, slowly, in daylight, to the exact spot where something has just been destroyed, and then sit there, winching, for anywhere from 20 minutes to several hours, in full view of whoever caused the damage in the first place. If an army has thousands of tanks sitting in reserve, the decision writes itself. Don't risk the specialist, just replace the loss. Britain, coming out of the early years of the North African campaign, could not afford that kind of arithmetic. It didn't have the reserves to treat a damaged tank as disposable. Every hull mattered, and every hull that could be saved was worth saving, even at real risk. So on the 1st of October 1942, 3 weeks before El Alamein began, the British Army did something almost nobody remembers today. It formed an entirely new corps, built specifically around the idea that repair and recovery deserved dedicated, trained specialists, rather than being handled piecemeal by 3 separate departments that had been doing it badly between them. The Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, REME, took over that responsibility. Their motto, Arte et Marte, by skill and by fighting. Field Marshal Montgomery, not a man given to sentiment about support units, said plainly that this new corps existed to keep the punch in the Army's fist. 3 weeks after it was formed, that corps was tested for real. The Second Battle of El Alamein began on the 23rd of October, 1942, and it was, by design, a grinding, attritional fight. Montgomery was losing something like 4 tanks for every one he destroyed. On paper, a catastrophic exchange rate that would have broken most armies' will to continue. But the losses weren't equal in what they actually meant for either side. A British tank knocked out on ground the British controlled could be reached, stripped, towed, and repaired within days. A German or Italian tank knocked out on that same contested ground, as the front line pushed forward past it, was simply gone the moment the retreat began. There was no time, no fuel, and increasingly no ground left from which to organize a recovery effort. When the withdrawal west started in earnest, Italian workshops had to destroy roughly 40 of their own vehicles before pulling out entirely. Abandoned tanks that couldn't be moved and couldn't be left for the enemy intact either. By the start of November, the German Armored Corps in North Africa could field barely 30 tanks fit for action. The British, despite the brutal exchange rate, could field more than 600. That gap wasn't produced by better guns, better tactics, or braver crews. It was produced, quite simply, by mechanics. Behind those numbers were REME recovery crews, doing a job that gets almost no attention in the history books. Driving forward, often at night, into ground that had been fought over hours earlier and might still be within range of enemy guns. Working by torchlight under a stationary hull, hooking cable to a chassis that could still be sitting in a minefield. Every single recovery was its own small, unglamorous operation, with real risk attached and absolutely no way to shoot back if something went wrong. The tank crews got the medals and the war stories. The recovery crews got the tank crews a second chance to fight. None of this worked as a single heroic act either. It worked because REME wasn't just a handful of brave men with tow cables. It was a complete pipeline, built specifically for this exact problem. Forward recovery sections attached directly to armored units, close enough to reach a knocked-out tank within hours rather than days. Light aid detachments embedded at the regimental level. Small teams whose entire job was immediate battlefield fixes, a thrown track, a jammed traverse, a fouled engine, repairs simple enough to be done on the spot without ever moving the tank at all. And behind them, base workshops further back from the line, where anything too badly damaged for a field fix could be stripped, rebuilt, and returned to service using parts standardized across the whole army. A tank didn't need to be perfect to go back into a squadron. It needed to be reachable, and it needed somewhere organized to go once it was reached. That layered structure, forward, regimental, base, is what turned individual acts of battlefield recovery into a sustained advantage that compounded, tank by tank, week after week, for the length of an entire campaign. The same corps built one of the strangest, least-known vehicles of the entire war less than 2 years later, for a completely different kind of battlefield. On the 6th of June 1944, alongside the landing craft and the gun tanks hitting the beaches of Normandy, REME put ashore something built from a standard Sherman hull, with the turret removed entirely and a tall, waterproofed tower fitted in its place, built specifically to wade through nearly 3 meters of seawater and drag drowned, swamped vehicles clear of the tide line before they blocked the beach for everything coming in behind them. Around 60 were built for the invasion. Roughly 52 of them actually landed on D-Day itself. Their crews included trained divers, because someone had to physically go into the churning surf, sometimes under fire, to hook tow chains onto a vehicle that was already partly underwater. In the first chaotic days of the invasion, these vehicles pulled hundreds of stalled and sunken vehicles clear of the surf line. Jeeps, half-tracks, tanks that had come off their landing craft too early and sunk in deep water, wreckage from vehicles that never made it off the beach at all. And in doing that soaking, dangerous, entirely unglamorous work, they kept the beaches physically passable. Keeping the beaches open meant keeping the entire invasion supplied, because every truck, every reinforcement, every round of ammunition following the first wave needed clear ground to land on. Without that recovery work, the buildup behind the initial assault would have backed up into chaos within hours, stalled behind wreckage nobody could move. Neither of these vehicles ever fired a shot in anger. Neither one appears in the photographs people remember from either battle. The famous images from El Alamein are of infantry advancing and guns firing. The famous images from D-Day are of landing craft ramps dropping and men wading ashore. But take the recovery vehicles out of either story, and the arithmetic changes completely. El Alamain's exchange rate stops mattering in Britain's favor. Normandy's beaches jam with wreckage within the first day. The tank gets the reputation. The recovery vehicle is the reason the tank gets to have a second battle at all. What Britain built in October 1942 wasn't really a single piece of equipment. It was an institution, a standing assumption trained into every armored unit from that point forward, that a damaged tank is not a write-off, it's a temporarily unavailable asset, and getting it back is worth real risk and real resources to achieve. That assumption didn't disappear when the war ended in 1945. It became permanent doctrine, carried forward through every generation of British armor that followed it. The same underlying logic, the same dedicated specialist role, rebuilt onto newer and heavier hulls decade after decade, right up through the Cold War and into the vehicles built to recover Britain's most modern tanks today. It's a strange kind of legacy for a piece of military history. No dramatic kills to point to, no famous engagements named after it. Just a quiet, repeated fact, proven again and again, on different battlefields, decades apart. The side that can hold its ground and drag its wrecks home outlasts the side that can only build new ones to replace what it loses. Britain learned that lesson in the sand outside El Alamein in October and November of 1942. It relearned it in the surf off Normandy in June of 1944. And the doctrine built from those two battles has quietly outlived both of them. If you want more of the machines that decided battles without ever firing a shot, subscribe. That's exactly what this channel covers.